In the 90s, 16-bit consoles dominated the one-on-one fighting games, and in this particular battle there was two main leading candidates, Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. Whilst a few other games such as Clay Fighters and others would try and fight to get their little piece of the pie, none would be able to rival these two gaming giants. Except one. Hello there, welcome to saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground, and welcome to our retro review of Killer Instinct. Originally released in arcades in 1994, Killer Instinct was ported onto the SNES by 1995. At this point, Street Fighter II had already reached the Super Street Fighter II Turbo phase, and Mortal Kombat was on the verge of Mortal Kombat 3, meaning this game had some seriously well-established games to compete against. But despite naturally having a lot in common with both Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, Killer Instinct had a number of things that allowed it to stand out from the crowd. First of all, while Street Fighter II was very much cartoon or anime styled, and Mortal Kombat was very much going for that real life look, Killer Instinct had a look and feel entirely of its own. Most noticeably, the game was labelled as 2.5D. It wasn't a 3D game, but it certainly had a look and feel that gave it a 3D aspect. Everything from the in-game combat to the cutscenes and even the loading screens did give it a semi-3-dimensional feel. The cast of characters was also far more diverse than we'd seen in any other fighting game. In most other games, Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat especially, the majority of characters were humanoid. In Killer Instinct we had werewolves, dinosaurs, skeletons, cyborgs, humans, just about anything you could consider really. So some other games had shown us characters that were other than human, but usually they came alongside really crap gameplay. Killer Instinct did not have that problem. Also, while the game was heavily influenced by the SNK games World of Heroes and Fatal Fury, it clearly borrowed aspects from both Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat that made each so popular. It certainly took aspects such as the fatalities from Mortal Kombat, giving them no mercy moves and also a humiliation move, as well as stage-specific fatalities, or something along those lines. However, they were far less graphic and therefore controversial than the Mortal Kombat ones were. Despite that, the graphics and gameplay was far more bright and colourful like Street Fighter II, so it kind of had the best of both, as well as introducing their own combos and combo breakers, and the combos in this certainly added an additional dimension. Not only did each character have their own special moves and, as mentioned, no mercy moves, but they also had a flurry of combos, and each time you hit a combo, it told you exactly how many hits on the screen, with each one having its own specific name, such as an awesome combo. The storyline of this game is pretty much inconsequential, as it usually is in these types of games, but it does still have one. It centres around a company called Ultratech that has used its clandestine affairs to create a whole host of deadly warriors, and so it sets up a combat tournament to test them out and see how well they fare in fights against skilled combatants. It's a pretty weak storyline, granted, but hey, it's something, and realistically, it doesn't matter when it comes to this type of game. The game is also well known for its fantastic soundtrack, which certainly does stand above and beyond anything Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat was doing at the time. The game was so proud of said soundtrack that it was actually released on a CD along with the game, so if you bought the cartridge on the SNES, you got that killer cut CD along with it, and let's be fair, some of the bangers on this you'd want to listen to even if you weren't playing the game. One possible weakness for the game was the end of game boss, Idol. Instead of having multiple end of level bosses or a particularly strong antagonist, we got this monstrosity. But how was the game actually received when it was released back in 1995 on the SNES? Well, the scores did vary. The vast majority of the scores I could find gave it really high rankings, up in the 90%, A's, that sort of thing, 4.5 stars, etc. However, there were a few that did rate it a little bit lower. There was a B thrown in there, and a few 3-star ratings, which showed maybe the game wasn't exactly for everyone. On looking further into it though, what I did notice is that the majority of the negative comments came in comparison to the arcade, saying that the frame rate wasn't quite the same and that some of the best sound bites and moments from the game on the arcade didn't make it onto the SNES. So instead of this being a criticism of the game itself, it was more a criticism of the conversion from the arcade to the home console. It's probably worth noting that the game was also nominated for a Most Innovative Technology Award at the AMOA Awards. It didn't win the award, but the nomination alone shows that the game got some high praise. But what about now? How does this game stand up to expert retro scrutiny? Well, first of all, I have to come clean. I absolutely loved this game. As much as I loved the Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter games, I kind of found that as they kept re-releasing versions of Street Fighter 2, I became slightly disenfranchised with it. And whilst Mortal Kombat 2 was an absolute belter, I never really liked Mortal Kombat 3 that much. But when Killer Instinct was released on the SNES, it became my absolute go-to combat game. In fact, it became one of my go-to games. I absolutely loved the combo system on it. In some games the combos were just far too easy, and in others they were far too complicated. This game sort of nailed the balance perfectly, and while some people pointed out that the no mercy moves, or danger moves as they'd later be called, the fake fatalities, they weren't quite as graphic and over the top as some of the ones you'd see in Mortal Kombat, but many of them were far more brutal and interesting. Watching Fulgor's head turn into a giant tank cannon and just start shooting the hell out of them, or watching Combo suddenly just walk over and break their neck, or the rather weird one where Orchid would expose her chest to them and they'd have a heart attack and die. What can I say? For me as a teenager, these were just far more interesting than the over-the-top graphic ones seen in Mortal Kombat. The vast majority of the characters weren't as responsive or intuitive as I would like them to be, but Cinder, Jago, Fulgor, Combo and Orchid were all good enough that gave me half of the roster I enjoyed using. I wasn't as fond of any of the other characters, but it was still a great deal of fun playing as these characters, and each of their individual moves and their own individual end point to the story when you finish the game certainly made it worth sticking around. I was also a big fan of the combo system, and while some of the criticism for this game was that the combo system made it too easy for experienced gamers to beat newcomers, shouldn't it be that way? Shouldn't someone who's put hours of time into the game to learn all the different combos and special moves be able to beat someone who is brand new to the game? That said, that's not entirely true anyway. I specifically remember playing this game with my cousin who came round and button mashed the hell out of me, despite the fact that I could nail every 64 128 hit combo in the game. She was still able to beat me, so that doesn't quite stand up in my opinion. I'm speaking so fondly again of my experiences with the game originally playing it because I think that has to be factored in when I am looking at how it stands up now. You see, I hadn't played this game for a very long time, and I was so excited to be able to play it for this review, and overall, I was slightly disappointed. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the game is now poor, but maybe because I held it in such high esteem, there's something about playing it now that I expected more from it. I played this game numerous times through for this review, and I was surprised at just how limited the combat was. While the combo system was really cool and some of the scenes you see on screen from that were brilliant, some of the special moves were really cool too. But even things like not having throws and not having more versions of the kicks and punches than we did, even the special moves were kind of okay. The combos seemed to be the main thing that really stood out. Even the no mercy moves were a mixture of really awesome ones and bang average. The graphics, which at the time were potentially my favourite graphics in any 16-bit 1v1 combat game. I thought they were far more exciting than the sort of cartoonish Street Fighter graphics, and even the quote-unquote realistic Mortal Kombat graphics were not quite as cool as these were, in my opinion. Maybe something about that 2.5D graphics that really allowed it to stand out. It just looked so unique, especially for someone playing on a Super Nintendo. But those graphics have really not aged as well. From a retro perspective, they look really cool, but if I'm just judging it as a game now, some of them don't quite stand up. I think as well, taking a step away from those rose-tinted spectacles, I could only really say that around half the characters are remotely playable. Cinder, Fulgor, Orchid Combo and Jago are all quite cool. The rest are kind of awkward to play for me at least, and I've got no interest in wanting to get better with them. What I will say is that the music and sound in this is still absolutely elite. Some of the tunes in this are complete bangers, and even the sound bites and stuff within the game still stand up pretty good now. There is a slight possibility that for one particular reason, I may be judging this game a little bit too harshly. You see, games like Street Fighter 2 have continued to re-release in one version or another on tons of consoles. I've had versions of it on the Wii, on the Game Boy Advance, and even on the Nintendo Switch, so I've never really had a chance for it to develop those rose-tinted spectacles. I've actually kept playing it. I also never really got a chance to remember it more fondly than I actually do when playing it. Whereas Killer Instinct was a game that, when it came out, I loved it so much that I stepped away from Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter 2. This became my fighting game. But then, since not having a SNES when I was a kid, I've never replayed it. I've not had the capacity to. It's not a game that's been re-released tons of times on various consoles, and the later versions of it were completely different. So now playing it again for this review, it's a good chance that maybe I'm a bit disappointed that I overly hyped it up in my head. That's probably not fair, even for a retro review. If I put aside my own self-imposed overhyping, it's probably fair to say the sound is great, the graphics are still decent, the gameplay is serviceable for a 1v1 fighting game, and if at least half the characters for me, it's probably not that bad. I always would have rated Killer Instinct in my memory as being a good 9 to 9.5 out of 10. That's how well I thought of it. However, looking at it now, it's not that bad either. It's still pretty good, and I think 7 out of 10 is probably a fair rating for it. It's a game that never really got the hype and credit it deserved, and at the same time, my overhyping and rating for it in my own head probably didn't do it any favours either. This is a solid 16-bit fighting game. It had some really good characters, some really innovative designs and graphics, and the sounds and music in this game are top drawer. And if you can find that Killer Cut soundtrack, even on YouTube, definitely check it out. It was brilliant. But what do you think? Comment below, let me know if you ever played this game before, if you think I'm judging it a little bit too harshly, or maybe I'm remembering it just too fondly. Until next time, take the high ground.